Hello folks, today I am working on making candy boards, and my recipe for this is just basic sugar, basic granulated sugar. I'll go ahead and just dump me a bunch right in my mixing bowl there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of crater it out. There's a reason for this I'm about to show you. What I'm using is Ultra B pollen substitute. Right here I'm using a half a cup scoop, and you see, so we're maybe, I don't know, what is that, a quarter of a cup, maybe a third of a cup. Just take and sprinkle it in lightly, and you see it's got some lumps in it, so I'm trying to mash these lumps up and break them up with the sugar. I'm not going to get them all, and it's okay. It doesn't matter if we get them all or not. We're just trying to get most of them. We want to try to have kind of a fairly even mix. See, here's a lump right here, and there's another one. We want to have as even a mix, or homogeneous is maybe the word, as we can. To get a good distribution of pollen substitute through all of the sugar. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this, but this is what I have available to me right now. I could probably get one of those old style metal flour sifters with the little crank in the bottom of it, and that would break it up pretty good. And what I'm going to do next is, you see, I don't even have it fully mixed yet. My main purpose of doing what I just did is to break up the lumps, because it will mix and homogenize once I start adding the water to it. And you'll understand why once I show that process. Let me get my hot water in a jug here and I'll show you. It doesn't take a lot of water, not as much as you would think. That being said, I have posted about the way I make these candy boards in the past, and I get a lot of criticism about how much water I use, because I'm making it much wetter than is actually necessary. And even this is probably going to be too much water to where I'm going to have to add some more sugar to it. And that's fine, because I've got 3 of these candy boards to make, and what extra sugar paste I have left over, I have another process that I do with it to make sugar bricks. Now, do we see how wet this is? This is very wet. I may even have to go and open another bag of sugar, which is not a problem. I keep several 50-pound bags of sugar on hand just for the bees. I think I've got about 350 pounds left today. Now, do you see how wet this is? It is way too wet to put in the candy board. But what I've done by making it this wet is the sugar's not really what you would call dissolved, but there's enough of the sugar granules that are actually dissolved. Once it starts to dry, it will solidify all the loose granules together, and the bees won't haul it out, because I have found what I did my very first year of beekeeping is I just put parchment paper on top of the inner cover, and I put dry sugar on top of that. And what wound up happening in the springtime, well, back up a little bit, in the winter, the bees didn't even mess with it. And when the summertime rolled around, they hauled it all out of the front of the hive and threw it on the ground. So I wound up with a lot of sugar on the ground in front of my hives. This still isn't going to be enough sugar to thicken it up to where I need it to be. But you don't want to add too much, and I may actually have added too much. It just makes it harder to stir in the mix. That's actually another reason that I mix it so loose to start with, because it's still too wet to actually put in the candy board at this point. But do you see how hard it is getting to mix? It is my plan to go to Harbor Freight and buy one of those plastic drum cement mixers to mix this stuff in. I have one of the orange metal ones that I used the first year I made candy boards, and it worked alright, but it wore some of the paint off of the inside of it, and so I wound up with a very orange tinted candy board. The bees didn't seem to mind, but I do, so I don't want to do that anymore if I can help it. Now, do you see how thick this stuff is getting? It's getting really hard to mix, but it's still too wet to go in the board. So I'm just going to dump the rest of my sugar in here. And honestly, this should put us right where we need to be. Oh yeah, look at how thick it's getting. So let me get this all turned in, and then I'll come back and show you how I apply it. You want to make sure you really dig down into it in case you've pushed any dry sugar down. You want to try to get it all wet if you can, but if you don't, like you'll see some here that's where it's real light colored, it's not really fully wet. That's not a problem, because sugar is what you call hydrophilic, which means that it draws moisture in. And it's actually one of the reasons that sugar and even honey can be used as a disinfectant, because it's so hydrophilic, it acts in a way similar to salt, and it draws the moisture out of pathogens. Now, what we have here, you can see that my candy board is made out of 1x2 furring strips. I cut them to size, and I glue each corner, and I staple them together with my brad stapler. I use 1/4-inch crown 18 gauge staples, put 2 staples in each joint. I use Titebond 3 wood glue because it's suitable for damp locations. And then I just take 1/2 inch hardware cloth. I cut it to the proper size so I can bend me a flange up on each one of the edges of it, stuff it in, and I use also 1/4 inch crown staples to put that in, just a shorter length. I think the ones for nailing the furring strips together are 1.5 inches long, and I think the ones I use for this, for the hardware cloth, are either 1/2 inch or 5/8 or something like that. They don't have to be very long. All you're doing is just holding the hardware cloth in place for the sugar to get hard. But what I'll do now is, on this paper, there's a shiny side and a flat side, or a dull side. What I do is I turn the shiny side up because it is a little bit more resistant to absorbing the moisture, and this is just really thin tissue paper. You cannot use parchment paper. It is way too thick for this. But this tissue paper, once you put this sugar slurry on it, it's almost like it's not there. You know, the bees just go right through that like it's nothing. But now that I've got my parchment paper laying in, you see I kind of try to go on and get it tucked in everywhere. Well, most everywhere. The first thing I want to do is I want to plop me a great big old dollop right in the middle to hold that piece of paper from sliding around. Because we want to try to avoid having any gaps along the edge that the sugar slurry can run out of or slide out of. So I have a little lip turned up on each end. I buy this tissue paper at Walmart out of the gift aisle. I'll put a picture up so you can see it. But anyway, once I get my paper in place and my dollop right there in the middle, I just take and try to fill in the edges all around. And honestly, it's a lot like working cement. It really is. You use a lot of the same principles for doing this that you do for working cement, pouring cement floors and the like. And yeah, I could probably use a bigger scoop or something like that to get it in here faster, but I have discovered once you get it laying in here and you're trying to smooth it out, it's very difficult to work if you just put it in huge large clumps. So you just kind of try to put it in where you need it and use the spoon. You see what I'm doing. And when I get done doing this, I hope I'm going to have enough. I may not have enough to fill in this candy board here. It takes about 14 or 15 pounds of sugar to do this. I don't know. I have never weighed it out exactly. The way I figured it is the first year I made these, I just took the total amount of sugar that I used and divided it by the number of candy boards that I made. Which also, the first year I did this, I didn't add Ultra B pollen substitute to it, and it worked great. The bees loved it, and when the springtime rolled around, before there was even a spring nectar flow, I already had brood boxes full of brood and full of honey. And yes, I know it's funny honey. I know it's honey made from sugar. I don't try to sell any of that, but the point is that it gave my bees a head start. So back before the weather was even right for them to be gathering in resources, I kind of sort of fooled them into thinking that it was spring when we were still in the tail end of winter. I think I'm going to have maybe just the right amount for this. That's what we're looking like anyway. Just get it all broke loose in the bowl and scrape it in. And the truth is this is a very easy cleanup because it's sugar, it's water soluble. And you're messing with a sugar paste or slurry. So when it hits the countertop or the floor or whatever it falls onto, it's just right there. You can kind of scoop it right up. Yeah, so I think I put just the right amount. That bucket that I had it in is a 2-gallon icing bucket that I get from a local gas station. So now that that's all done, like I said, there's a lot of tricks you use in here that's very similar to working concrete. This would be called a screed board. Just kind of work it back and forth, and see, I'm tearing the paper on the edges up. That doesn't matter a bit in the world. See, I'll just take and throw that right in the disposal bin. Just tear it right on off so we get it out of the way. You can cut it, and what I usually tend to do is I do actually take this paper off of the edges before I put it on the hive. Even if I don't tear it up in this process, and the reason for that is because when I put my insulated outer cover on it, it will pull it down, and especially if it's on one of my smaller boxes, a 6 frame or a 8 frame or a 5 frame box, it will hang down low enough that it draws moisture if you get any rain or anything like that. So this one right here is actually a little low on sugar. That'll be fine because I always make spare candy boards for the I don't know what I'm saying here. I make spare candy boards for the late winter in case what they have is used up and they're getting low on resources in the hive. I'll have a spare, and if it turns out that they don't need that spare, what I'll do is just hang on to them because it doesn't go bad. The pollen substitute doesn't go bad. I mean, it will if you let it stay wet or get wet or anything like that, but I put them in a fairly cool, dry location and just store them for the next winter. And if nothing else, you can always just take the sugar out of it, break it down, mix it up into sugar syrup to feed to them if you're concerned about it going bad. But anyway, that's my process on making candy boards, mixing up the slurry and putting it in. I may mix up a little more to fill this out, even though it's not necessary. It is important that you try to keep it below the top edge here where your top is going to sit. Now, that being said, I don't know if y'all noticed, but I've got a piece of 2-inch thick styrofoam insulation here that my candy board is sitting on. I actually have insulated tops that use this exact insulation that have a 1x6 side that goes down over the hive, and that allows it to cover up the crack where the candy board sits on the hive. Plus I have this 2 inches of insulation sitting on top of it, and then once you set a few bricks or a cinder block on top of that, or even if you prefer to use ratchet straps, it'll pull it down, and that insulation tends to give enough that if you do have any lumps in here, it'll kind of mash up into the insulation. It won't hurt a thing in the world, and as the bees take the sugar down, it's gonna allow the top to drop anyway, if it's got any amount of pressure on it. So I will cover those tops in another episode sometime later down the road. I've got to get some other things taken care of before I need to make any more of them, so we'll cover that later. In the meantime, pamper your bees.